Thank you for listening to the Dog Trainers Podcast, a podcast created by dog trainers for dog trainers, or anyone who's ever fallen in love with man's best friend.
It's interesting that you frame it that way in a very good way, because I also follow you like on Facebook and all that good stuff, and so I see the posts too, and sometimes I'll go through and read people's reactions, and I think number one, it's kind of funny. Typically, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like I'll see the Sean O'Shea post, then I'll see the Good Dog post, and it's the same post, but it's the two different pages, and and I know it's in the interest of being thorough, and I find it interesting how like the different pages, like people give different responses sometimes too.
Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah.
I can put up the exact same post on the Sean O'Shea page, and that's got 5,000 folks and crickets. I can put it up on TGD page, and I've got 55 comments, or reverse.
Yeah.
And I don't know what to attribute that to, besides maybe Facebook algorithms, luck as far as what gets seen and what doesn't.
Maybe. Well, I see them both, but too, like even the same post between like Facebook and Instagram, and the responses are very different. And it's interesting. And what you were saying just now about you look for those like kind of universal parallels. That's definitely something that like that you can feel when listening to your guys' content. And you guys are nice enough to find the time to give a shit ton of content. I mean, I was a huge fan of the Q&A Saturdays. I remember, when you first put them up on the like podcast, so I can listen to them audio, because I would just watch video, but then my phone would die and hate me. But as you talk about the parallels and why that interests you, and why that's one of the many things that made you just top tier at it, because they always say, do what you love. It reminds me of Tommy Davis. Do you know Tommy Davis? Upstate Canine. He's really big on YouTube. He's a dog trainer.
Yeah.
And we spoke to him, and he's super cool. We think you guys would get along like really amazing.
Cool.
But he said something real similar that was like, honestly, man, because he does strictly reactivity too. And I think you guys do more than that, but you do, I believe, strictly e-collar, if I'm not mistaken.
Prong e-collar.
Right. So his whole thing was, he was like, yeah, man, you'd be amazed. And these are why I drew these parallels between you two. He was telling us, like, you'd be amazed, number one, sometimes how many like Facebook philosophers just want to jump all over you for your posts and everything. But also the reason why I stick with
one of them just retired anyways.
Sorry. The reason why he sticks with this like controversial, I guess you could say, format in training is because it's what interests him. It's what gets him out of bed in the morning. And what he found to be his like passion, and what I definitely can tell has been just something that you do amazingly well compared to, I think, every other dog trainer I've looked into, is just, there's a way that you take this content that can be contentious, if depending on how people think, and can be dense and full and hard to like digest, but you make it relatable and easy and even fun, and and I just wonder how much you think that that's added to the success of like the YouTube stuff and the beginnings of all that. Like I remember Laura and you doing your videos years and years ago.
Yeah. Well, you could attribute that to me not being so bright, and the limitations actually helping me out. I think I'm always trying to walk that balance between, like, I don't want to sound like a fancy pants. I don't want to sound like a dog trainer, a condescending dog trainer to anybody. I know what that's going to do. I know it's going to push people away. I know it's going to alienate people. So I'm trying, and I don't always do it perfectly. That's an understatement, but I try desperately to put out firm information that I think people need a little bit of a kick in the ass with, but I also try and temper that with enough compassion and understanding, especially because I've been the same guy who's screwed up, fucked up, So there's no looking down. There's no casting my eyes downward and being like, well, when you gain the skills, maybe you'll be able to do these things. For me, it's like, I really push back against that. I think if we're going to dive into the psychology of dog trainers that tend to leverage overly complex concepts and terminology. It's absolutely ego, and it's a way to elevate yourself.
Look how smart I am. Look how smart I am.
Rather than say like, hey, I don't know you, but maybe if I put this in just the right way, it'll connect to you, and maybe you'll have the walk of your life, or maybe you'll make the connection that helps you get your dog to stop charging the door, or stop trying to, bite your child, or whatever it might be. So I feel and I truly do walk that line, because there's a bit of a, if you ask my team, there's a bit of a how would you say? There's a fiery aspect of me that like is exceptionally frustrated with the soft, permissive aspects of society that I see continuously undermine dogs. So there's that part, and I just want to strangle people and be like, stand up, do your thing. You can have so much more with your dog. And the other part is like, I get you don't know how to do that. You don't have those tools yet. And can I lead you along, but can I give you that gentle kick in the rear that feels inspiring, feels caring, feels loving even, but also accountable, which is like, that's no easy feat, but that's what I'm trying to do. And like I said, sometimes I do better than others. Sometimes people feel that I'm being too firm. Sometimes it might feel too foofy. It's like you show up every day, and with the goal of like, how can I try and convey a message that's actually going to be the most impactful for people, or something they haven't heard, something that's just in a different way that they're like, light bulb goes off. Okay. Yes. So that's what I'm trying to shoot for.
And can I say too, because I also wanted to bring up the importance, because I know you guys know the importance and the value of putting out information, like, because I look at the old YouTube videos and the Q&As, and that takes a lot of time. And then now, since we started our podcast, and before the podcast, Brent and I have done videos and stuff together, even if a Q&A Saturday, you guys sat down for 2.5 hours, that's more than 2.5 hours worth of editing and uploading and description writing and all that good stuff. And you guys were already busy at that time, if I'm not mistaken. I think you were close, or you had already moved up to Chatsworth from like NoHo.
Yep.
Right. So, and what I gather from that, and this is just me looking from the outside, is I remember loving like the Sean's rants, YouTube videos, and and then the longer form stuff and the shorter stuff, and I definitely felt that you were like, it's not different of the message from the book, in that like you're firm, but because you give a shit, and it's almost annoying how people, they like, you can just do, and it's like, how do you find the words to get people to do that kind of thing, And I've noticed over the course of time, with the content and stuff online, it almost feels to me like you've been getting a little more firm, as we've gone, but I like it.
Like I'm not tolerating it anymore.
No, but I think it's important.
You're 100% right. And I would say, if I'm really honest, a lot of that has to do with who I've been studying and who I follow. And so watching people that I really admire stand up in diverse businesses that have, nothing to do with dog training, and watching them push other people to take chances, push other people to risk, push people to try and see what's possible. And also to call out, like, if we're going to be honest, like, call out laziness, call out cowardice, call out not putting in the work.
No accountability.
100%. And so for me, there's become, depending on what I've studied, if we went back through all the books and videos I've studied, there's definitely a firmer through line or theme through those videos. And so that's inevitably going to come out as far as holding people accountable and being a little bit more on the edge of that. And the last thing I want to do is make anybody feel bad about that they're struggling. I don't want to enable them to feel comfortable in their crap. I don't want to enable them to be like, well, it's hard, and I know we've all got it hard. Like, that's the last fucking thing I want to do. But I also don't want to sink anybody's battleship where they're like, oh man, like I've got no shot, no chance. So I'm trying to walk that line between like, you can do it, and if you don't do it, it's because you're possibly lazy and not holding yourself accountable. Right?
That's
Trying to balance it.
Yeah.
that right there, I think, is where I have to say, and as much as as much as I'm just a huge fan and everything else, I don't want this to feel like ass kissing, because it's not. It's our job on this podcast to be like 100% straightforward.
Yeah.
But with that being said, I honestly do believe, you're talking about like the importance of walking that line. And I think you phrased it perfectly. Don't let people indulge in the victim mentality or whatever, but also don't overdo it. I honestly do believe, listening to other dog trainers and even people like outside of the dog training spectrum, but I know what you mean, that are kind of adjacent.
Yeah.
You do it the best.
Wow.
Yeah. Let me talk from a perspective. So I've been quiet for the last 10 minutes because what I've been doing,
is it about to go bad?
No. Well, I'm going to just be extra real. What I've been doing is I've been trying to see if this guy who's in front of me right now is the same guy that wrote those books. And I can say 100% this is the same guy. Wow. Because, again, I've known who you are. I didn't study your stuff until Mariano introduced it to me, right? And I can say I wasn't a big fan, as of a week ago when I had to dive into this content, right?
Sorry.
No. But here's. I mean, we'll talk about volume 2 because we got that less than 48 hours ago.
Yeah.
But here's the interesting thing. Mariano asked me yesterday while we were coming up with like what are talking points and things like that. He goes, "So what'd you think?" And I said, "This is a book of missing pieces." Meaning, if I was working with a client, if I had a problem with teaching someone something, if there was something that I knew as a truth but I couldn't put the words in, I was missing pieces. Right. And so this is a collection of missing pieces if you go through this book and both of the books, but if you go through these books, they're like poems that are passages of exactly what you needed to hear for that one client 2 years ago. And you're like, fuck, I need to put this to memory. Right.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And the beautiful part of the way you explain it, and this is something I told Mariano yesterday, was, the pendulum always swings, right? The pendulum, especially in this industry where you're either too hard and then you get too soft, and then you get too hard, you get too soft. Yeah. So our last person who was firm was Caesar, right? He was the last person. Yeah. Back when I was 18, I watched every episode. Yeah. I'm sure you did. He was a great inspiration. Yeah, and every dog trainer we've had on this podcast, we all know that we owe some part of our profession to Caesar, right?
100%.
Change the game. Okay. So we all agree on that. And the interesting thing is then the pendulum swing to the other side, right? You're Stillwells, you're all this other stuff. And then now we're swinging back. The funny thing is you are speaking truths, universal truths. You are speaking, you're making firm, compassionate. You're making love about structure. You're making all these things Caesar was doing. And this is why it was so revolutionary, but not to compare the two of you, because I would say you guys both had your style. But what I loved about yours is the simplicity and how connected it is to people, to the people, what we're doing wrong and what it is that we could be doing better. And I think your understanding of human nature is so well expressed that it's so well expressed because you know how people function, you know how people work. And obviously as dog trainers, we have so many case studies, client after client after client. It's the same issue. It's the same feeling. It's the same guilt. It's the same everything.
Yeah.
And I'm guilty of being that dog trainer who hyper-focused on a technique, and I wanted to break that shit down into all of its component pieces like a Lego set, and then I put that shit back together, right? Yeah. But I remember starting the big fuse and the big spark that got me into dog training was the simplicity I learned from Caesar, and the universal truths and the power of leadership and all of those things. And there was a whole gap in my training career where I was focused on things that stimulated me. I was focused on How can I develop an off-leash obedience with food? How can I develop an off-leash obedience on a long lead? How can I develop competitive heels? How can I, develop a long send away? How can I do all these things? And then I stayed away from e-collars. I stayed away from them. About 5 years ago, I was introduced to e-collars, right? And I got so good at these techniques, Keeler method and revising it, and amongst the new skeet style stuff, and just diving into all this stuff, breaking that shit down, putting it back together. I lost track of the universal truths. I lost track of the simplicity of leadership, right? And I lost track on those things. And one thing I'm super reminded of, just reading your content, everything that you were writing in those books, when you thought you came up with an original idea, and then you hear it somewhere, and you're like, oh, I guess I didn't make that up, right?
Or they published it sooner than you.
Or they published it. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
They wrote it down. Yeah, they just wrote it down, and that's what I felt like, and it was so cool to see someone else in the same industry with the same passion, who feels the same feelings, thinks the same thoughts, but just to see them written down in a poetic way, in a point that got your attention, in a way that didn't make you defensive, that doesn't make you feel bad. And maybe I'm reading it differently because I am a dog trainer. I go, yep, truth, heard that. Yep, that's good. But yeah, man, for someone who wasn't a fan, I'm very excited to have you on this podcast and to listen to this content. And yeah, it's great. And so just reorienting my brain onto universal truths and the power of leadership and the power of structure and the power of all these things, that this is what my foundation was built on. But now to be reminded of like, hey, motherfucker, don't forget the most important stuff.